So, welcome along. This is the second session of the multi-center seminar series, and for the one who have recently joined us, this is the research arm of the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. We have been running this seminar series for 55 years, which we are sort of proud of. And this edition, the theme is resilience, which simply indicates that how cities and their residents manage to be resilient in various urban disasters. I'm Hamil, and with my co-convenes Marta, we are running the seminar series during this academic year, and we are honored today to have Dr. Tanzil Shafique from the University of Sheffield, who is going to talk about the informal settlements. And I believe that informal settlements are the most vulnerable areas in face of any urban disaster. So I'm going to make a brief introduction of Tanzil, and then we will get to know him by the time that he speaks about his new publication. Tanzil Shafique is a lecturer of urban design and director of the postgraduate program at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture. Previously, he taught at the University of Melbourne, Australia, and the University of Arkansas, USA. Tanzil research looks at southern urbanism, pluriversal architectural practice, and informal planning, particularly by climate change impacted communities. He co-convenes the platform for just housing and justURBAN think tank, working towards climate justice with local activists and citizens. Tanzil's recent book include Atlas of Informal Settlements, which he is going to talk about today. That
was last year. I'll talk about the new one.
Yeah. Sorry. Just a small note on the format of the seminar. Tanzil will talk to us about 45 minutes to 1 hour, and then we will have 15 to 30 minutes of the discussion. For the folks online, you can type your question in the chat box, or just virtually raise your hand and I'll unmute you to speak your questions. So without further ado, just over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's a pleasure. I applied for MPhil in Cambridge in 2015. At the same time that I got a job at the University of Arkansas, I didn't get the scholarship, so I had to make a choice whether I want to earn $42,000 or pay somewhat similar time. And it was with Ingrid, I think now, who's at AA. But anyway, so that's a bit of a background. Let's see if this works. Okay. I'm going to read my entire book, so it's going to take 20 hours. People don't stop me. Imagine a community of 300,000, convivial, walkable, 6 times the density of Manhattan, in the size of 2 Buckingham Palaces. It provides low-cost services and affordable housing mixed with many productive uses. It's a city within a city, but the streets aren't wide enough to allow cars. The houses seem makeshift, and the drains perhaps need work. The continuous adaptations make it look like a place under perpetual construction. In fact, the landholders and community leaders have incrementally built their houses over the last 40 years, and urban amenities too. Ignored by the municipality, they have organized themselves to provide services such as gas, electricity, and water. Some say that they steal them from the formal neighborhoods. The only catch is that the settlement has been built on unused government land. The dwellers currently face threats of resettlement to allow for quote-unquote development projects planned by the state, oscillating between the desire for a better urban life and the fear of being evicted. They persist in upgrading their city. At every chance, a roof is fixed, a road paved, a sewer added, land reclaimed, house extended. Their efforts collectively constitute a city building process, but one that we know little about. So these generated processes, I ask, what processes and relationalities lie behind the city building, maintenance, and governance? Why are they materialized in the ways that they are? why they are resilient at the face of so many negativities. So who governs and who doesn't? So these socio-spatial inquiries are at the heart of the book. But that's where I stopped reading. I'm not going to read anymore. The rest is going to be very informal, keeping true to the settlement, I hope. So this is a book that's coming out from Bloomsbury. This is coming out of work that is done during my PhD, but I'll have a chat about that. But let's begin with a standard disclaimer that I have always when I present. So the standard disclaimer is this. When I'm using the words informal settlements and slums, and you'll notice that the word slum is used in the title, which was, I must admit, like a capitalist decision by the marketing guy from Bloomsbury. This would sell better. But which actually I acknowledge very soon in the book when, third page in, I say that why I'm using that slum, because, slum, the word has been used by, slum dwellers themselves. Slum and, there's an organization, Slum Dwellers International. They use the term. So it's not a pejorative term for them to use. So, but what I mean here is informal settlements, we're looking into the production process, so I'm interested in is how a city, an urbanism is produced, not directly by the state or capitalist institutions. So how is this production happening? So I'm not really interested in this sort of like how UN Habitat defines slums, which is about conditions. So it's about overcrowding, it's about lack of water. So if Yorkshire Water cuts water in my house in Sheffield for 3 days, technically my house is a slum because it's lack of water. So I hope you get the point. But this is the site. So this is an urban biography of Korail, which is on the left. And as you can see, it's pretty dead center in Dhaka. It's as I said, like a huge agglomeration. And of course, this is not atypical. Rather, this is quite the norm in many, many cities. I would say in majority world, you'd have pockets of formal planning and then large swathes of urban production happening in precisely in this way. So we can, just take a tour of that entire world and then we keep finding them. So I'm interested in this production of informality, which is understood through this case study of one settlement, so a biography. Now, of course, they are pervasive, expanding, persistent. So this is the global map, sort of skewed, so it's weighted based on the percentage of informal settlements, and but then, of course, you see that global north does not figure that much, but of course, there is a southern pinch to that. But there are lots of books on slums and informal settlements. So why do we need one more? So from this point onwards, I'm trying to sell the book, right? Gladly, I don't have, you don't have to pay for it. Now, because I got a grant, so it's an open access, so you can get the PDF at the very end, because in majority world, even a 10-pound book would be very costly. So there is no point writing a book that only academics read through the courtesy of their library buying it. So, I'm very lucky that I could, negotiate so that also the book is actually CC4 BY, which is Creative Commons license. It's actually free to download and copy and use commercially. So, if someone makes a copy of this in India and sells it, okay, yeah. Okay, so I look at that. I know reading books. We want to read so many things, but we can't buy time, unfortunately. So it was very difficult to talk about the book in the sense that I felt like I'm gonna be like doing a marketing pitch, and it's difficult to talk about my book and say good things because, of course, I'm biased. So what I did is I was very lucky to get endorsements from a lot of people. So I used those endorsements, which is in the book, as a way to sort of pull out strand of what they see. I'm glad, and I'm also perplexed that they see that. I didn't, but if they say it, it could be true. given that they're professors and everything. So Ananya Roy, I mean, I don't know if you know Ananya Roy at UCLA. She talks about, I mean, when I met her in 2019 in Melbourne, she talked about this a lot, which is some ways it feels like this global South discourse has been stuck in some of these global megacities. So, for example, a lot of resource on Mumbai, but not a lot of resource in a similar, another city. So it's almost like skewed towards certain cities. So cities like Dhaka, which has a population of around 22.5 million people, but there isn't a lot of literature. So of course, this is about visibilizing an unknown territory. Now, David Satterthwaite, who again, I don't know if you know, so it's been a very long-term researcher in urban informality, works at IIED in London, and then he talks about, I mean, if he's saying that after 30 years of doing research, that what do we know about informal settlements? Very little or nothing from censuses, nothing from government and international agencies, household surveys. He is critiquing basically the work that IIED has been doing a lot, which is a lot of development projects end up really enumerating how many people. It's the same thing as if someone did a survey of this room and said, oh, there were 35 people, it doesn't say a lot about this room. So it's in this way how settlements, lived realities has been reduced to numbers, metrics. That's sort of like an inherent critique in the book. So which is why I talk about sort of like the lived reality. Now, those who aren't too familiar about the geography, so this is in Bangladesh, capital is in Dhaka. As you can see, we're scaling down. And maybe, I don't know if you can see the dot, but the settlement is right at the center of that urban agglomeration. And now that kind of like also makes you question sort of, usually settlements are towards the periphery where land prices are low, but this is sort of like prime land. This is Oxford Street in London. Why? Who allows a settlement to grow there, or who doesn't evict them for putting up penthouses and stuff? So, as I said, all this sort of like you can see sort of like a gridded city all around, and the settlement is right packed into a place where, as I said, it's unused government land, and as the story goes, there was a lot of infighting between different government lands because this was too prime. So lots of different government agencies were like fighting in between to grab hold of it. So the Supreme Court said that, wait, hang on a minute, we need to sort it. It's going to be like a long case. So it went on for 20 years. While it went on, people just built because it was unused. And it was really good because you could literally walk to all these neighborhoods which are planned. They need a lot of services. So you have a very walkable, employment zone all around you, literally, in the middle of the city. So as we zoom in, as you can see, sort of like BTCL is the National Communication Company, which is located north, and you can see sort of like Gulshan, as you can see, it's sort of like, as I said, Oxford Street. Per square feet, Gulshan, that the high street is actually per square feet price is actually more than Fifth Avenue in New York per square feet. So you start to really see how that urban riches and sort of poverty is juxtaposed so within a very spatial range which is very small. Now, what am I really interested in? I'm interested in urban production. So what gets produced? This is 2001, and we're looking at the western edge of the settlement. And that's a lake system. So some of the land was already unused, but I mean, in the last 20 years, that unused land was used. So naturally, they got inspired by Dubai land reclamation. I'm kidding. No, they didn't see Dubai, but it's pretty much the same logic of land reclamation. And as you can see, that's 2015. And the slide will end here. That's 2017. That's when I was doing my PhD. And that's now. So they went for a Venetian model of, so that's, you have the canal going, in the middle. So, they were very considerate. So I'm not I'm not judgmental about it. I'm not saying, of course, there is ecological consequences. For the purpose of the research, I wanted to understand how this production happens. Who decides? Who designs? Why roads are decided? Why there's like they seem to be following some sort of regulations within. Who decided this? Because surely it wasn't planned by the government. It wasn't planned. So who did this sort of interior planning within the settlement? So now, to understand that, the central register or the central analytic lens is coming from uh, a perverted reading of, let's say, Deleuze and Guattari's notion of desire. And this is coming from, of course, if you know Deleuze, it's all about rhizomatic thinking. So I read off from the foreword, which is written by Abdul Malik Simon, a well-known sociologist from the Global South. So if you know Malik's work, Malik, what he sees in this book is, this is a meditation on the heterogeneous desires at work in the creation, management, and reproduction of coral. But a sense of how various trajectories and materializations of desiring, of wanting specific things to happen, occupy, perhaps only temporarily, produces particular modes of production. So how disparate desires support and detract from each other, how they shape shift, often easily and in very contradictory ways. So the big question was, how many times have you seen the word sort of like organic growth tied with informality? Oh, this is done by slum dwellers. Oh, this is bottom up. Now, clearly, by the end of the book, this is sort of like a myth-busting exercise. There isn't a bottom and there isn't an up, because it's all all these different desires that often are contradictory, which is sort of like I'm giving you the end point. The book will end on that note. But whether it does it is actually proven if you read it. I mean, I make the claim there, but the evidence of it is woven through the chapters. The second bit was, looking at the book's stance. Okay, I'll start from the lowest point there. The book is not the PhD dissertation. So this book is written when I'm doing right after I did my field work and I came back to Melbourne, and then I was supposed to, for the University of Melbourne PhD, then you need to submit 3 chapters, which is like 50,000 words. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you 50,000 words, but it wasn't the 3 chapters. I wrote 11 nonfiction novels, what I call. So the PhD committee sits, they say, one of them, the chair of the committee is like, this is great, this is excellent, but it's not going to get you through PhD work. So when you can publish it later. This book is that. So I went back and they gave me 1 month to write 1 chapter to show that I can do academic writing. My supervisor told me that my wife read it and she thought it was spectacular. She's an anthropologist. And I said, and my supervisor said, yeah, that's the problem. You're an anthropologist and you're saying spectacular. Where is all the urban design theory and how to talk about urban design in an academic way? Because that's what standard PhD is. So I keep this in the back drawer for 2 years, finish my PhD, and then I come back to it. I work on it for the last, so I started this 2 years ago. So I worked on the manuscript, and then, so this is quite an important bit, because this writing was done in a way where I wasn't focused on in what discipline I was talking. So this is sort of like is reflected. So Rahul Mehrotra, who is the chair of urban design in Harvard, he says that the book does not privilege any one disciplinary lens and instead collapses, intersects, folds, interrogates, hybridizes, and synthesizes multiple perspectives. Now, did I do it consciously? No. I was writing about these certain experiences that I had, and then sort of like use that as a theoretical register to explain all these experiences and to give it some coherence. So it's not done as a way to say, oh, I'm going to talk about sociology now and I'm going to move on to. So it's not, absolutely. As you will see in the table of contents, it doesn't really demarcate any sort of disciplinary edge over others. Michael Keith, who's at the Oxford Institute of, is it the International Development? He says synthesizes. So synthesizes skills of ethnography, architecture, and political economy. Now, this to me was very important because if you go back to Deleuze, Deleuze very strongly suggests a sort of like a flat ontology this sort of moving beyond sort of like binaries between the social and the spatial, sort of, so there was this philosophical background to this way of trying to understand space and social formations at the same time. So the reason that I put undisciplining is actually, so I mapped out sort of all the literature and that I was engaged with. So this is the mapping of that. And then you can start to see sort of how, of course, there is these interconnections, but there is a very particular thing here. It's highly racialized and it's highly northern. Now, which takes me to sort of like another point, which is it's not in the title. Again, the marketing guy said you don't need it in the title, but in the introduction, I talk about why it's a Southern biography. So one of the book reviewers commented to me that he said it like this: you're trying to make English do things that English doesn't, because the introduction is written in a very English tone, but the chapters are written in a Bangla tone. Okay. Now, what do I mean by that? It's written in English, but it's saying things in a way that it's not usually, that's not how you put it in English. But of course, this is done as a political device to sort of dislodge a very reductionist way of talking about that I encountered when I go through literature. I felt this was disembodied, non-situated knowledge about places that I couldn't get a sense of. It just felt like it's you are dissecting a lab rat, and people aren't, this is not. So I thought I really need to move beyond that. So you can see that I talk about, so this is on page 14. Often these settlements become a site for well-intentioned but voyeuristic scholarship, and using these marginalized sites as a research Airbnb. So you drop in, stay, get data, come back, publish, and move on. Actually, I'm the 45th PhD from Korea. 45th. So when I started my PhD, I'm actually writing about that experience in another paper. It's called Dirty Research. So when I went there the first day, and they're like, oh, one more PhD student. What do you want to know about resilience? We know the SDG goals. SDG goal 11 says, because they work with NGOs, the NGOs give them briefings. They know all about it, and they're like, okay, we're going to answer, which sort of answer? Do you want like a gender sensitive answer? So we can do that. Because we have been giving interviews for a long, long time. This is true because I'm the 45th PhD. So imagine public health people. It's really located very nice way, from very close to 4-star, 5-star hotels. So you can just come in, drop in. You don't have to worry about going to the edge of the city. You can come in, do interviews, go back. And that is what's exactly been happening. So I said, okay, no. I said, they actually said that you're going to go back to Australia, get your dissertation done. You'll get a good job, and then you'll never come back. And I made a point that, okay, I'm not going to do that. Now that I have made that point, actually, I have had to work with them. Now, recently, we got a grant, like it's $500,000. It's about, it's given by UK Foreign Office, Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. It's about the wetland restoration through local agroecological practices. So right now, we're working with the local urban farmers within the settlement to sort of restore the water edge. And so this is somewhat a real project that's been happening now. All I'm saying is, the reason that I'm saying is that because of that commitment, I felt that no, it's not just about extraction. So I'm not just going to get data, move out. How can I help? So that relationship, that the fieldwork ended in 2019, but we kept on going. We just got the grant last year. So it's like after 4 years of this working together, trying different things, we tried a Commonwealth grant, it didn't work. Okay, move on next, and then actually this one worked well. So we're very, very privileged to actually work right. The last thing is to speak of a place in its own terms. That's what I meant. Getting terms out of to speak of it in a way. It's not about translations, but more of an ontological shift. The last bit, and I think you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this. And so this is not simply an academic exercise for me. And again, this is how it's coming through for people who read the book, talk about that. I love this phrase because I think Gautam he's at IIHS in India, and Gautam really was the only one who picked it up very strongly, this idea that the love of place gets equal place as the rigorous analysis of its urban condition. Now, I say that without romanticizing it. There are drug dealers here, yeah? But there are drug dealers on the formal, expensive side as well. So I resist a criminalization on the fact that there are criminal activities here because criminal activities are happening all over the city. So I don't want to mark it up. So again, this is on about this idea of moving beyond the field work and working with the people there. The table of contents, and I'll just go very, very quickly over that. How are we doing on time? Half an hour? Okay. For 15 and 20 minutes more? Okay. So as you can see, sort of like the way that the book reads, it's about, as I said, these 11 short stories that sort of like operate independently. If we were to pick one up and then read, yes, it would work. They very loosely target one myth each and then sort of dislodges it. But it doesn't do it like explicitly. So for example, the first four, so the first one, for example, talks about engagement of the state in the settlement. So, and then the second one, it's about, the community itself. The third one is about NGOs, like non-government organizations which work in settlements. So it's about NGOs, the silent partner. The third one is about events and disasters and how disasters shaped a lot of the settlement. So it's a narrative about how disasters and events, disasters are events, very agential events. They have agency in a particular way in architecture that we don't really give them because we see them as sort of like background. And so again, as you go through, so there, the fifth one is about the social aspects, but it's very loosely. The sixth one is about the water body, and then the seventh is about housing, eighth is about access, ninth is about publicness. So it's loose somewhat, but it interconnects. But again, not a discipline-specific way of talking about it. So I'll just quickly go over and then have like very short anecdotes, if that's okay. Another hole in the wall. So what do I mean by that? So the city does not want to look at this settlement. So they said, you know what? We can't evict them now, but okay, we're just going to build a wall around it. And then they'll have the settlement behind it. So this wall, that's 2013. So the city comes in and then builds this huge wall around. And that's the same wall after 6 years. So like they use this architecture provided by the state as a scaffolding and then say, okay, we're going to pitch our tents next to it and then have lean-to structures. And so like this, like an amoeba eating, it's almost like engulfs this. So this is like a very strong, socio-technical process. It's not simply a technical process. So I use this as a way to get into this notion of what is the relationship between the state and then the everyday, the settlement. Now, before I explain this one, let me show another picture. So when I was doing field work in 2019, it's the same time that this is in another part of the city. And this is right after an eviction drive. So when I heard about the eviction drive, I literally went that day. So this is right after an eviction of like 5,000 families. And then, the state comes in with the bulldozers, cites that this is illegal occupancy, bulldozers them. And literally people are actually picking up the scraps because this will be reused as architectural material where they're going to go and pitch another tent and build another house. So a lot of it, they were like, yeah, they broke it, but what are we going to do? So let's get on with it. So they're already sorting through this B&Q to get through this stuff. And then some of it is usable, some of it is not. But of course, it's not like these people suddenly then they go away because, this kids are going to school, they have jobs. And if they were to go into apartment buildings like that and then say, maybe it's a 4-bed apartment and 4 families can rent it, they're not going to get rent because there is a social stigma. If they're from the informal settlement or a bosti in Bangla, people will be like, no, I'm not going to give you rent. Your background doesn't check out. So that's in that reality, what are they left to do but to sort of find another place where they can build, and they need to build instantly, like that night. Within that picture in your head, there is this story about one particular guy, and this is his house was right next to the city wall. And then you can see actually it's not a 5-inch wall. So typically the walls are 5-inch, and this part that is around his house is 10-inch. So it's two bricks side by side. And the particular reason is that when there was a fire once, he actually broke through the wall. So when they built it back, they were like, this guy, last time he broke it. This only his side make it 10 inches so that it's not easy to break. So like literally the state operating at a very granular level, like with a vengeance of one person, one house, and we're gonna make it 10 inches. And then how it's expressed as a material, in terms of it, like an architectural expression of that vengeance is that wall. So hence, so this chapter is around this notion of another hole in the wall, because he said if he needs, he'll break it again. So you start to get this each of this chapter is sort of threaded through in a narrativized way. So these are narratives which sort of peel through the lived experience of each of these actors. So this is using stories as a way to tell about a truth. It's like children's book, great for telling truths and lies, but in a narrative fashion. So sometimes it's very subliminal what you want to get across. So that's the method that's used in the book. Why the community does not exist. So this is the story, and this is from the first page in that. January 1st, 2020, 2019, when I started field work. The day before was a national election vote. So I went to the voting station, which was right next to the settlement. And then I get chased away by a lot of people who are like young people who are just trying to ensure only their party gets a vote. And they're like, trying to sort of like cause a havoc. So, and then this is the story of how I did an interview with the rickshaw puller who was taking me away. So he's like, oh, no, we can't go in. And then he's pulling me away. As he's pulling me away on the rickshaws, the tricycle, and he's telling me who these people are. The reason that I put this story is because he gave me a lot of names. Like, oh, you see these people, they're sort of like their leader is this guy. So I heard the name. After a few weeks, when I'm doing I'm starting field work, there is a community event. Some guy walks in, and he actually introduces my project to the community members. And then he talks eloquently about gender rights, about research ethics. He talks about why the settlements, he talks about right to the city. And I was asking another person that he's talking about my project, it's really good. Who's this guy? And he said the same name. So this guy who was a community leader, who was really fighting for their rights, but also on the other side were also part of that political machinery out of which he was getting his legitimacy to be a leader. Because they can serve the national political party, they get to be a leader. But at the same time, all these inherent contradictions. So the moment that I started realizing that, there is no one was taken for granted about all these double lives and triple lives being lived, that was true in a lot of parts of the settlement. So the settlement that you see that looks like a mat literally is broken into lots of different territories, all of which is really well defended in the same way that UK is now dealing with its border with the European Union. So it's like you can, like leaders would walk with me, after they're walking with me and they're talking, and then suddenly I see them, they're like, no, I'm not gonna walk. Yeah, let's go back. Because there is this invisible, now you couldn't read it in the urban design, but it was a socially constructed way of distributing leadership across. And then this is quite invisible, but again, as interested in who makes these decisions and all that. So, and I talked about this inherent heterogeneity of a settlement. So there was no quote unquote slum dweller, because either they had to be a renter, so roughly 80%, or a landholder, someone owning that house. So either they had to be the two. Or so there was all these differentiations within that really meant architecturally they made a lot of different decisions. So a landholder gets to make a lot of architectural and urban decisions as opposed to the renter, who is in and out. If they're here for 10 years, they also take part in the decision. If they're here for 10 days, shut up and don't talk. So it's a very temporal dynamics of participation. So based on your social knowledge of the locality, you could. Typically, it takes 5 years for a renter to become a landlord. 5 years. Because by 5 years, you know people, then you say, I'm going to get a small land there. You get the permission from the local leaders, and then you start building your own house. And roughly, on average, it takes 5 years. So all those stories are sort of in here. NGOs play a lot of role. For example, your tax money, or people who are now paying tax, I don't know, your tax money funds a lot of the charities here. So for example, WaterAid UK. WaterAid UK then pays it to WaterAid Bangladesh, who then hires local non-government organizations to then build stuff. For example, this toilet. So this toilet is built as a community toilet. So on the report, it says community toilet, but you can literally see someone building his house on top of it and sort of again engulfing it. And then the toilet door is sort of like encased within a courtyard. So after 2 months, 3 months, it's literally an architectural operation going on that engulfs that. So of course, I'm just giving one story, but of course inside there are many different stories. Some are positive, some are negative. But again, it's a heterogeneous, complex relationship with NGOs who are never really thought of in architectural and urban terms. We never really see them. We always talk about the state and the people, and which is why I call them the silent partner, because they are very much part of that. Shaped by fire, there are a lot of arson that happens, because oftentimes the best way to kick people out is if there is an arson attack and then the whole thing gets burned out. The government can move in and then so sometimes they do that. So there are lots of stories of that. In particular, I focus on one case study where actually there were some architects involved. So there was a lot of good-natured architects who went and then they built they redrawn and they said, this is a better way of doing it. Like literally, this is the master plan. Only one road got built according to this. That is in the black box. The rest, it went back to exactly how it was. Because there was no sort of like this long-term participatory negotiated consent, just because it looked really nice that, oh, it's all fire separated and now it's better. They weren't buying it. Yeah. Now this one, I actually find out that actually they themselves widened their roads. So this is actually after widening happened. So the people did it by themselves in other areas where the fire didn't happen. So this is why I say that the event of the fire in which so many things burned was agential in the sense of it formed a narrative. In other areas, people were like, if we don't do this, it's going to happen to us. So they self-widened this road by themselves after this big fire in 2016. So there was this massive architectural change by themselves for something that NGOs have been trying for 10 years to widen the road. And they're like, no, that's fine. We don't need it. And then suddenly that changed. Of course, I'm simplifying. I'm not going to go into the detail of each because it's really like, there are 7 more. But again, as you start to see, this is, how interior design is influenced. This is a local club of the leaders. And you literally see the walls being plastered with the political party leader as a way of showcasing sort of legitimacy. So because the slum dwellers, they are marginalized within the political process, very few of them get to access the local MP, for example. So the moment they go with the MP, the first thing they do is like take a photo. Then they come back to the settlement and then they actually keep on talking about that they just met the MP, because that lends a social legitimacy to them taking a decision. And this happened not just with MPs, but with me, because they were taking photos with me because they thought I'm going to bring some funding. And then after 1 month, they realized no funding, it's just one page. Then they left me alone. But by that time, I had accrued my social legitimacy. After that, I could go in and then people saw me with these leaders. So they're like, this guy's legit. So again, that's sort of like what went on. Stuff like this. For example, this is built on illegal land. And then imagine it's like a ruse. It's like it's a ruse that the city corporation gives them number plates of the household. It's like, but it's, of course it's not official, but it's coming from the city corporation as a way of like a temporal social legitimacy, because people are very proud that their house has been, given a number plate. So again, all this talk about and how this how this transfers into a material form. That's what, So lake. So you saw sort of like what the lake was being reclaimed. This is me following one of these people who was actually going and dumping stuff in the lake. And the story is, as capitalist production in the formal city breaks down old structures to build high rises and stuff, all this construction debris is actually collected by people in Kerala. And then they bring this construction debris from the formal city and then they dump it into the lake to build the new ground. So literally, they're getting paid 2 times. On one side, you get money to take away the rubble, and then the rubble is then actually used to reclaim the land. So again, this shows sort of like this cross connections across the formal and informal, like literally the buildings of the formal city are building the ground of that informal. So again, this is sort of like moving beyond. And you can see, a site is being prepared for an architectural, and you can see literally the row houses being marked with a very small foundation. The fundamental unit, a desire for 6 arms. Now, in 6 arms in Bangla is Choi Hat, and this is literally 6 arm means. So people kept talking about the desire for 6 arms as a way to say all they need in the city is Choi Hat, which literally means as in they need a room that is 6 hands by 6 arms, like 6 arms by 6 arms. And then they talk about this because this is sort of like that essential unit. So it's like a studio apartment size. It's like 3 meters by 3 meters, let's say. So a typical household would look like that. A unit would look like that. And then I found that people like, they don't just want this, 6 arms like just the room. They really see it within an assemblage of this larger territories, which actually comes with the houses. So for example, a room like that will usually be part of a cluster like that. And with that cluster comes social bonding, social connections, neighbors, you name it. So when they don't mean literally just the 6 arms. They oftentimes, so this is unsaid, but when you let people build, they're, always doing this sort of clustering, a collectivization of the housing needs. They don't see themselves as individuals, although on a statistics, it will be like 300,000 people live on it. That doesn't really convey that notion of collectivization that has happened. Through the eye of the needle, this talks about access. So a very key term in informality, in regards with architecture and urban design is about access. And, that's one person trying to get in. So that's the smallest one that I could find. It's almost similar to the place that I stayed in Venice. So somehow it's legal in Venice and it's like that here. But of course, in other parts, there is actually why then. So who makes this decision? This chapter is about how come in the same 500 meter by 500 meter area, how do you have these differentiations? Who decided that you'd be able to sort of have this, but not have it everywhere? So again, this chapter talks about that. And then yes, it is an explicit, link with this notion of heterogeneous ways of forming, relationships. Let's say, so public space, the way that we typically understand these places, they don't have public spaces. They're just like poor people bunched up and then slum dwellers living in very bad conditions. But no. So when I mapped all these public places, this is a mapping of sort of like all these different public places in terms of their multifunctionality or formal intentionality, as in, are they intentional? Are they coincidental? Are they using like different aspects of this, as spaces being used as multifunctional as public space? So this chapter talks about that. The last 2, and this one is holy cow, because if you start entering the city, the Corel, one of the first street, shops that you'll notice as you go in is actually this is a bakery, like a sweet shop. Yeah. And you wouldn't notice, and I would not blame you for it, but the milk that is used to make this is coming from cows, which is actually behind this. So there are 30 cows behind this. So there is a farm running, which is producing. So all this idea about, farm, like farm to table restaurants, and this idea of localized growth, small ecological footprint. There's like 30 cows. The funniest thing is I was there with my supervisor. The cows are Australian. My supervisor was Australian. They get the semen from Australia. They order it, and then they hybridize with locals because of higher production. So I had actually the picture of my professor standing next to an Australian cow. But the funniest thing is this talks about how these functions are mixed together and how they're synergistic. Where do you think the feed is coming from for the cows? It's right next to a wet bazaar, which has a lot of vegetables that, the discarded parts of the vegetables, the bottom of the cabbages. Every morning they go and clean up the bazaar, bring all this waste, and then feed it to the cows. So, no grazing required, but it's again an ecology that has developed there. So then I talk about how this functional mixes work in this settlement. The last one is called the 70 Godfathers. And why is this? Because there is a lot of media story about how Karail is only it's controlled by 70 leaders. Everyone owns it. So it's like 70 mafia control it. There is a urban legend. And so when I did this study, eventually I found out that, of course, it's not that there are leaders, but they don't have absolute control. There are people who actually own one room, literally, and there are people who own 200. Who's going to earn more than you ever? And he lives there. So someone with 200 rooms, yes, you can conceive of them as sort of like a local leader who is like a mafia, but there are lots of people, like 70% of people would have rooms less than 4 or 3. So they rent one out, they live in one, or they live in 2 and rent one out. So that's sort of like a myth of busting the myth of 70 Godfathers. And the way that I actually found out this sort of like shifting relationships is when I knocked on a door. So this is again story number 11. I knock on a door doing interviews, and then she opens the door, and I'm like, I did not knock on a toilet, and you can see that it's a corridor that leads into the interior of the house. She is postmodern. This is Marcel Duchamp, because she said they were renters. They bought 3 rooms out of 10. Now, to find out access from the main road, the only option was to take away the toilet and put it in the back. So they actually changed the toilet, and then they put the door. But they said, we don't have money right now to fill it up. And then it's not being used. It's just like a decorative piece. So we just leave it there. So that showed me that there was a lot of buying and selling going on, change in tenure, and renters becoming landlords. The most extreme case is this guy who in 2003 starts with 1 room, ends up having an ownership of like 200, and then he dies, and then slowly now he has 60. So there's like a constant flux of this ownership. So it's not, again, dislodging this myth of, this one household, one slum dweller, poor people myth. So again, this is like all this heterogeneous governance and all of that goes on. I'm not going to the detail, but if you were to really summarize all the things that I'm saying and then go back to the original question, what I was looking at urban production, I make the argument in the book that there are 3 particular modes of operation going on, and I call them bricolage, bazaar, and big box. So in the first instance, when it's a bricolage form, this is usually the forest dwellers who build a house without having an explicit planning agency. So they were like, we're going to stay here temporarily. You can see them, you can see the sort of haphazardness of the way that the architecture is organized. And then over time, as they build agency, as they build collective relationships, there was a time when this becomes collectivized, when there's a lot of people, and almost like this is a terrace housing. This is almost an egalitarian distribution of land, because they were like now on parity, and then they know each other, and then they want to build houses. So they do the land allocation in a collectivized egalitarian way. This was the middle phase. And then came late capitalism. So some of these leaders who were there for a long time, they said, hey, we can just actually do this as a business. We're going to fill up the lake very fast, and we're going to do this, 4-room units. So they literally hired local architects within the settlement. And then they said, okay, get me an apartment unit. And then they just stamped it and then cookie cutter boxes, and then they sold it. So in the two previous stages, it was the people who built it was living in it. But for the first time in those, people bought it and moved in. And the social dimension is completely different in those areas. Here, people really don't trust their neighbor because they just bought the house. How can I trust my neighbor? And the other ones, this one is a completely different social dynamic because they have been together for a long time. They have built it together. They know each other. So there's a completely different way of organizing socially. And this is the last two slides. The point that I make at the very end is this notion of ihsan. Now, ihsan can be loosely translated as care. So, but this is a local term that is influenced by sort of Quranic and Arabic understanding, but also it's used colloquially in Bangla. So people say, can you do ihsan to me, which means, can you care for me? What I argue is that the transactional nature of understanding urbanism does not work here, because a lot of the resilience is actually tied with this more than justice framework. So it's not about transactional nature of I'm the landlord, you're the renter, we are on a transaction, you pay, no, because a lot of the landlords end up being taking care of the child. And that's done sort of like beyond, it's no payment. But if you were to go off into the work and then you couldn't have a place, then you just leave the child. So there is a lot of things that happen that is sort of cannot be explained simply by saying people are just, it's an economic transaction. It's not. And then this absolute collective life, this solidarity allows people to be a lot, be resilient. So if there is an eviction happening in one part, people actually in the other part, they don't take rent for 3 months because you know that someone got evicted or bulldoze their home. So a lot of this unmarked, uncharted care, which I look through this concept of Islam, is actually quite helpful to understand. So that's sort of like that end note for me to say that this is what I say, that it's important to bring together different ontologies from the places that we study. So it's not just about taking right to the city and then seeing it everywhere in the world, but it's actually seeing different manifestation of people wanting, and expressing right to the city, but something more in their own terms that may explain that locality that probably we can learn from. So this is sort of like that ending note of perhaps places like Parel will have a thing or two to teach us. As I said, this is an unfinished book because I'm still things are unfolding. And as its biographer, I can do nothing else but to continue my engagement with it. So that's all I have. Thank you so much.